Hello, everyone. Welcome to Talking Logistics, where we have conversations with thought leaders and newsmakers in the supply chain logistics industry. It's my great pleasure to welcome today's program, Kathy Fulton, who is Executive Director at the American Logistics Aid Network, or ALLN, and Dr. TJ Schaefer, who is Head of Strategic Programs at Project 44. And today we're going to talk about advanced visibility in emergency response situations. Now, we all know the key role that supply chain logistics people, processes, and technologies play in kind of everyday commerce. But those same capabilities and expertise also play a critical role when emergency response situations arise. So, what types of challenges are encountered when these situations arise? How can the supply chain logistics industry, help? And, how can technology, play a role in these efforts as well? Well, those are some of the questions we're going to discuss in today's episode. And it's great to have Kathy and TJ with us to kind of share their insights and advice on this topic. So, Kathy, TJ, welcome to the program.
Thanks, Adrian. It's great to be here.
Yeah, appreciate it. Glad to be here.
So, Kathy, let me start with you. And I've certainly, we've crossed paths many times at different conferences, and I'm familiar with what ALLN does, but and I'm sure many people in the industry does as well. But just in case some of our viewers aren't, as familiar with the organization, can you give us a brief overview of ALLN and what its mission and focus is?
Sure. So ALLN was actually formed by the industry right after Hurricane Katrina in response to the logistics challenges that happened along the Gulf Coast. There were shortages and lack of deliveries of critical commodities, and the supply chain professionals got together and said, you know what, we literally ship things around the world every single day. It seems like we as professionals ought to be able to deal with this. So that's kind of the inception of the organization. We've been involved in every major disaster since. And the way that we work is by supporting the nonprofit and the emergency management community as they are doing their response on the ground. So we're not going to be the people who are on the ground, but we're assisting with the logistics coordination. And that can be anything from warehousing, transportation, material handling equipment, anything that you need to run a commercial supply chain. The same holds true for a disaster relief supply chain. And so we're here to help the nonprofit community connect to the business community by finding donated or discounted resources.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I remember when that came about. Obviously, Katrina was such a disruptive, and all sorts of challenges involved there. Not only logistically, but the human toll that it took as well. And I think you like you mentioned, you realize at that point that what we do and what the industry does on a day-to-day basis, can play a role there moving forward to really assist when those things happen. And already this year, I mean, we've been impacted by a couple of major hurricanes, which is this time of the year is not uncommon, with Florence and Michael. I mean, what types of challenges arise from these major storms, and what are some of the hurdles that ALLN has to overcome to respond effectively?
Sure, and I'll start with just some of the business challenges that even our commercial supply chains have to deal with. And that's loss of power and damaged infrastructure. In the case of Hurricane Michael, similar to what we saw in Puerto Rico last year, it wasn't just damaged infrastructure, but completely destroyed infrastructure. And so when those power and communications and water, wastewater infrastructure are completely decimated, it's really difficult for the business community to continue operating. Where it's difficult for the business community, who are often well-resourced, it's even more challenging for the people who are living in the communities. When you look at some of the areas in North Carolina and Florida Panhandle that were affected, it's not, the communities were not necessarily the richest or most well-resourced. Some very impoverished communities were affected. And so that's really where the strength of the nonprofit community, the voluntary organizations active in disaster, or the VOAG community, comes into play. Most of them are already working in those communities for other reasons, whether it's just the daily hunger challenges or, whatever it may be, they have those strong relationships. So for us, looking at, how do we engage? How do we get the business community engaged? Our first priority is, check on our businesses that are operating in that area. What's the effect on warehousing? What's the effect on transportation? Two very different challenges between North Carolina and Florida, in that, in North Carolina, with all of the flooding, I-95 was shut down for days, right? In Florida, I-10 was shut down for a short amount of time, but some pretty easy alternative routing. So all of those, again, those same challenges that the business community has, the nonprofit community and emergency management community also faces. And sometimes they're even more impactful to the folks who are not doing logistics on a daily basis. So that's where the real connection between merging the commercial entities who understand what it takes to get around kind of the everyday challenge, with the nonprofits and emergency management groups, it is such a natural fit. And, not every emergency manager or crisis manager understands logistics, but every logistician, every supply chain manager understands crisis, because they're dealing with it in some form or fashion every day. The truck shows up late, or there's something that happened with something in the warehouse. We're all crisis managers as logisticians.
That's a great point. I mean, we talk about, obviously on this program, we've talked about a lot about, control towers, right? We talk a lot about how supply chain management in many ways is exception management, right? Because nothing ever goes according to plan. And really the companies that are the most successful are the ones who are able to manage exceptions as smartly and as efficiently, as possible. And then that's really some of the core capabilities and skills and experience that's, applies to your point, in these types of situations, which kind of brings me to you, TJ. I mean, now we're kind of getting a little bit into the technology side of things. I mean, obviously, technology plays a key, an important role in helping companies manage their supply chain and logistics operations as smoothly and as effectively as possible on a day-to-day basis. But how can technology help, and how is it helping, in these types of emergency response situations?
Sure. I mean, I think going back to what Kathy was speaking about, and maybe even going further back, I mean, as a consumer, everybody's kind of expecting an Amazon-like experience, right? You want to know whatever you ordered online, when it's going to arrive at your doorstep, right? And so companies and business, especially business to business, are really expecting that now. They want advanced visibility of to where their items are in the supply chain, and that's what Project 44 helps out with. I think what's interesting, though, is those same people Kathy was referencing are, really should learn to expect the same experience in disaster response. And I would argue that it's even more critical in that case to know the advanced visibility of where those supplies are coming inbound to help those affected by the natural disasters, and more specifically, understanding the ETA of that arrival, so things on the ground can actually be planned properly.
It really comes back down to kind of that foundational desire that when you talk to supply chain logistics professionals, they always talk about the need or the importance for visibility, right? And in this area, in this case, as you mentioned, having that visibility in terms of where materials might be, where are they in transit, where they might be in storage, and then the expected times of arrival can help people on the ground who are trying to manage, in this kind of almost chaotic environment, help them plan more effectively, right? I mean, in terms of being able to know when things are coming in, and then they can plan around their resources and their activities around that visibility.
Yeah, it's literally a life-saving case, in that situation, because if you're shipping phones or some other item that's really just for fun, that's one thing. Knowing when that's going to show up is important to your revenue stream. But knowing when that truckload of water or those meals are going to show up, it really can be the difference between life and death.
No, absolutely. And TJ, I would think that part of the challenge here, just like it is in a day-to-day piece, is really integrating, all the sources of information so that you're able to have that in some kind of aggregated platform, or, so that you don't have, I think part of the challenges that we have historically visibility is that, you've got a lot of paper-based systems, you've got a lot of, this, fragmented databases and all that, trying to bring all this information onto kind of a common platform, a single version of the truth is partly what's going to help in this type of environment, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So, you think of all of the things that Kathy was mentioning, people are offering their logistics services. So, trucking companies, people that are offering warehouse space and what have you. There's a lot of very positive things happening there, but it also leads to complications in that case where those different sources of data need to be aggregated to provide that advanced visibility.
Yep. No, at the end of the day, it's all about, making the, as the saying goes, making smarter decisions faster. And really, it's kind of bringing those pieces of information together in a format, in a way, in a timely manner, so that you can, act, as intelligently and as quickly as possible. So Kathy, can you share with us, some of the success stories that Vallon has achieved, to date, and then how do you measure success?
Sure. Well, I'll actually start with how do we measure success, and for us that's really pretty easy. Did the disaster survivors get what they needed when they needed it? And so we're working closely with our nonprofit partners to understand who are they serving. What are they, in what way are they collaborating with other nonprofit organizations? And then what's the impact of, the forklift or the transportation or warehousing service that was provided. And what we find is, it's not just, I love to say it's not just delivering diapers, because it may just seem like it's a truckload of diapers that's getting to, to a disaster survivor, and, maybe the industry touch on it is minimal, but then it gets handed out at a point of distribution. But ultimately it provides comfort to someone who has had a really bad day. So, some of the softer metrics that deal with, with the comfort and care and hope and dignity provided. When you look back through the history of the organization, we have really seen some doozies of crisis, everything from the earthquake in Haiti, which was, catastrophic, to, just most recently, we're working on the Typhoon U2 in the Commonwealth of Northern Marianas. And so all very different types of disasters, but some cool successes, along the lines of businesses who step up and store pallets of, water or food that get shipped pretty quickly, to groups that transport items that are needed much longer after the disaster. So we have groups who help move some of the items for couches and things to move people back into their homes after the homes are rebuilt. So I'll share one quick story, because I think it really is illustrative of the way that you never know where that support is going to come from. We were working with an organization who had donated some equipment to a nonprofit, and the equipment was in California. It needed to get to northern Florida, most recently with Hurricane Michael. And the equipment, we found a transportation donor, got the truck on the road, and everything was going great. And about halfway through the trip, we hear, hey, they forgot to load the pallet jack that's needed to move this equipment around once it gets to North Florida. And so the scramble is on, right? And, finding material handling equipment is typically a pretty easy touch for us. But I happen to, so we're talking thousands of miles that this equipment is moving. I happen to just take a look to say, what other nonprofits have we been supporting in that area where the load is destined? And I happened to see that there was a particular grocery store that we work with on a regular basis that had an operation literally across the parking lot. So you go from this, thousands of miles of distance to this really local connection, and everything in between is up for grabs in the way that Alan, calls on our business community to help. And that's, I think that's the nature of logistics and supply chain, right? We're global, but everything happens, that touch happens locally.
No, I think that's great. I mean, we talk a lot about the importance of collaboration again in supply chain logistics. Again, when it comes to day-to-day operations, but arguably it's even more critical in these types of situations. I think that's a great example of how the different participants that play a role here can collaborate with one another, to provide positive outcomes. And talking about collaboration, TJ, I mean, going back to you, I mean, how did Project 44 get involved, with Alan to begin with, and how will you continue to support kind of Alan's mission and moving forward here?
Yeah, sure. So, Kathy and I are both fortunate to be part of a great organization, the Council of Supply Chain Management Professionals. So that's where actually Kathy and I met, and then actually I learned more about Alan at that point, and said, hey, this is really something that Project 44 can help out with, and being part of the organization here, really felt it was important for us to really be part of and support Kathy and Alan and everything that they need. As far as the way that we can support it, I think we've already discussed that, is of course helping provide that advanced visibility to all of that support that's coming inbound, right? So she mentioned about a shipment coming from California, so indicating where that is on its journey, what is the estimated time of arrival, and then really providing that advanced visibility, which is going to be critical, as we talked about, maybe not in that particular case, but in the case of water supply or immediate supplies after a natural disaster. It's really important that Alan and their partners and the other nonprofits, especially those people on the ground, understand when those goods are going to arrive and schedule their labor accordingly. And that's where we're going to help out.
Yeah. I'll add to that, in that, scheduling labor in the nonprofit world means getting volunteers there. And so figuring out when to get your volunteers to the right place is always a challenge, but even more so. And we're excited about being able to, provide that community with the better, situational awareness for mounting their resources.
Right. I mean, because the last thing you want is, obviously, people give their time to volunteer. The last thing you want is to have, 100 volunteers show up and then just stand around for 2 hours because, the truck hasn't arrived yet, or, no one knows when it's coming. Right. So that doesn't create a positive situation for anybody. So as a way to wrap up, Kathy, I mean, for companies that, aren't already involved, with Alan, I mean, how can they get started, and what can they do to help?
So here's where I love being able to point to very specific examples, like what Project 44 is doing. They're using what's their core business, their core operations, to just support in a different fashion, right? So that visibility that they're providing for their commercial customers is going to have a huge impact for the post-disaster community. And so I'll say, look at what your operations are. What is your key line of business? That's the best way, because you're most familiar with that. If you're a warehousing company, don't try and go do finances for somebody. That's probably not the best use of your labor. And then I'll also say, protect your employees. Make sure that your business has a plan. The best way to recover from disasters is to make sure that those employees have homes to go back to and they have jobs to go back to. So protect your business, help your employees protect their homes. And then finally, check in with us, raise your hand and tell us that you want to be involved. Let us know that you have transportation services, or you have warehousing services, or whatever it is that you would like to offer, because we can help match you with a nonprofit organization that can use that, and not just during disaster, but year round. Disasters happen and then the news walks away. We're still responding to Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico. We're still working on things for Houston for post-Hurricane Harvey. Those needs are going to last for a long time. So there are always opportunities to get involved, and just give us a shout.
No, I know that, recently when Hurricane Michael was kind of approaching and kind of, we knew that, there was going to be needs there. I think you guys sent out a press release or whatever. You pointed people to your website because you have a lot of stuff in your website where people can, you can post your needs, or you can, and the types of things you're, so what's the website so people can check that out?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's fairly straightforward, allanaid.org, ALANAID.org. Yeah, we do post our needs. We don't post the donation offers. We kind of keep those, but we work with the nonprofits who we know are in need of them, and we share them directly with those groups.
Great. Well, I think this is a great example of, how the industry can come together to, do a greater good, right? By leveraging the skills and the talent and the technologies and the capabilities that we have, for day-to-day commerce to leverage it in these types of situations that really have, could be life and death situations for a lot of folks. So, like I always say at the end of all our episodes, we always manage to scratch the surface on these topics, but I think we covered a lot of ground today. Hopefully we've made people aware of A Vallon who weren't aware in the past, and can now, keep you guys in mind in terms of what role they can play moving forward. So with that, Kathy and TJ, thank you for making the time to be with us today.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Adrian.
I want to thank those of you that joined us. If you're watching this episode on demand, either at the Project 44 website or on Talking Logistics, and you've got a question or a comment for Kathy or TJ, you can post it there, and I'm sure they'll be more than happy to respond via that medium. Again, thank you for joining us, and look forward to seeing you in a future episode of Talking Logistics. Have a great day.